Hi, today I'll be talking about corresponding parts of congruent triangles. You can find that in page 232 on your textbooks. I would like to start talking about yesterday's closer. I know that not many of you were able to finish this exercise. And another reason that I would like to go over is that I want to show you how to write a proper geometric proof. In this exercise, you were asked two things. You were asked to prove that these two triangles are equal to each other, and you were asked to find the value for x. Now, before you can find the value for x, what you have to do is that you have to prove that these two triangles are congruent. You were given that side wx is congruent to side zy, and that angle A was congruent to angle B. Now, whenever you're writing a geometric proof, the first thing that you want to do is create a table, a two-column table, where you can write down your statement and your reasoning. For example, I have my two-column table here, and under statement, I can type that angle A is congruent to angle B, and my reasoning is that it's given in the exercise. Also, it is given that Wx is congruent to side zy. Now, there's something that you should be noticing right now, and that is that there is a side that is shared by both triangles, and that will be this diagonal, Wy. Now, in your table, you can type that Wy is congruent to itself, and that is based on the reflexive property. Now, notice that you have two sides that are congruent and one included angle. Therefore, triangle 1 is congruent to triangle 2 by the side angle side postulate. Now that you have proven that these two triangles are congruent, you can write a paragraph, a more detailed paragraph of your table. For example, you can start by saying, since it is given that angles A and B are congruent, and sides Wx and Cy are congruent as well. Also, by the reflexive property, side Wy is congruent to itself. Okay, now by the side angle side postulate, triangles 1 and 2 are congruent. And this is a geometric proof. This is how you write a proper geometric proof. You have to have your two-column table, and after writing your statements and reasoning, then you should write a paragraph detailing why these two triangles are congruent. Now that you have proven that these two triangles are congruent, you know that this side is congruent to this side. So, in order to find out the value for x, all you have to do is you have to you have to equal both equations. You have to equal both equations, and now all you have to do is solve for x. Okay, after solving for x, you should get that x is equal to the value of 10. Now let's move on to the examples in the textbook. On page 232, you have two examples. Example A gives you these triangles, and it states that angle A is congruent to angle B, and the side AM is congruent to side MB. Now, as I said before, the first thing that you want to do is create a two column table and write out what you're given. In this case, you're given that angle A is congruent to angle B, and you're also given that side AM is congruent to side MB. Now, if you notice, you have two vertical angles. You have angle 1 and angle 2. Now, if you remember, the postulate about vertical angles is that vertical angles are congruent. So you can't say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because they're vertical angles. Now, you can use one of the 4 shortcuts for congruence, and in this case will be the angle side angle, and that proves that triangle 1 is equal to triangle 2 by the angle side angle postulate. Now that you're done proving that these two triangles are equal, the triangle 1 is congruent to triangle 2, you should write out a paragraph. And you can start your paragraph by saying, since it is given the angles A and B are congruent, and sides AM and MB are congruent as well, also by the vertical angles postulate, angles 1 and 2 are congruent. Now, by the angle side angle postulate, triangles 1 and 2 are congruent. On your textbook, you're gonna find out that these shortcuts are very useful to prove that two triangles are congruent. And the definition of congruent triangles states that if two triangles are congruent, the corresponding parts of those congruent triangles are congruent. And your textbook uses the following abbreviation for that definition: CPCTC, which stands for congruent parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Now, let's move on to example B. Okay, example B is a little bit confusing because of the picture. The picture is a little bit tricky because if you look at it, you can look at it in two ways. You can see a big triangle ABC, and within that big triangle you can have three triangles. You can have triangle ADF and BEF and triangle AFB. And the other way that you can look at it is that you can have two triangles inside the bigger triangle. You can have triangle ADB and triangle BEA. Now, we're gonna stick to the second interpretation of this picture because that one is the very useful one. For example, you are given that angle D is congruent to angle E, and then you're given that this other angle, I'm gonna call it angle B, angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Now, if I pick one of these triangles, I'm gonna pick triangle ADB. You're gonna notice that it has two angles that are congruent to the other two angles of the other triangle. In this case, this is the other triangle. You're also gonna notice that both triangles are sharing the same side, just like in yesterday's closer. So after interpreting this picture, what you want to do is write down what you're given first. And what you're given first is that angle D is congruent to angle E, and you're also given that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. After analyzing the picture, you also discover that side AB is shared by both triangles. So in this case, AB is congruent to itself by the reflexive property. Now, we're going to use one of the 4 shortcuts, and in this case we're going to use that side angle postulate. Therefore, triangle 1 is congruent to triangle 2 by that side angle postulate. Now, let's write that in a paragraph. We're going to start by saying, since it is given that angles D and E are congruent, and angles 1 and 2 are congruent as well. Also, by the reflexive property, side AB is congruent to itself. Thus, by the side angle postulate, triangles 1 and 2 are congruent. And this is how you write geometric proofs.